If you included what was naturally there 300 years ago, pre-European settlement, we would easily have less than 5% than what was here.
Less than 5%.
Yes.
Wow.
You can still find these places.
Sure.
We all know about them. They're really unhealthy glades. They're a forest now. That would have been an actual functional glade.
Before we jump into even the nonprofit that you own, which is Snake Mountain Pack Goats, we'd like to start with just background. Where are you from? How did you grow up? And what are some of your interests?
So I'm from L.A., Lower Arkansas.
There it is.
I'm from Polk County, Arkansas. Actually, technically, so I lived in the Bay Area, California until I was 14 and then moved to Arkansas. My grandparents raised me, and my grandfather was originally from Arkansas and had joined the Navy and went all over the world and retired out of the Navy and was working somewhere else, and then got some, 3 kids, my brother, sister, and me, thrown on his lap, him and my grandmother. And after a couple of years of dealing with the California shuffle and Buffalo and all that stuff, they were just thinking about retiring, and they had a nice place, but wasn't great for kids. So they decided to move us back out to Arkansas. So we moved to Polk County, Arkansas, a town south of Mena. Some listeners probably know about Mena. Not too many probably know about Hatfield, but that's where I went to school, and that's where I graduated high school and lived, and then joined the military whenever I was 17. Actually, I signed the paperwork on my 17th birthday. That was sort of the rule my grandfather had. He said, you either need to have decent enough grades to get scholarships to go to college, or play sports, and get scholarships, whatever, some type of scholarships, or have some type of trade that you can wrap your arms around and for sure, or you're going to join the military.
Yeah.
That's your options.
Okay.
And
so you didn't have the grades.
I
You weren't good at sports.
Not the grades. I was not good enough in sports for any scholarships. So, that was my option.
Look at you now, man.
I know.
You're a doctorate.
Yeah, it worked out.
That's
worked
awesome.
out. Yeah, he knew what he was doing, and it was a really smart choice for him. So reluctantly, I signed the paperwork at 17, joined the Arkansas Army National Guard. It was not what he wanted. I was infantry, and National Guard, and he was like, well, that'll work, but that's like not what he was thinking. He was thinking the Navy, or maybe the Air Force, or maybe some job that you can do something in the Army, whatever that you can use in a career later from that training. And I chose infantry, which it's not super useful for too many trades out there. It's kind of hard to sell yourself on, I'm good with guns, and
Yeah.
I can eat bugs for hours on day. It's not real useful trade.
I'm a savage.
Yes, exactly. So, but he was like, that'll work. That if that's what you want. I didn't even know what it meant. I joined because I had a couple buddies that were going that exact same route, and since I had to join, I knew that would get him off my back. That's what I did.
Yeah, gotcha.
So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
So you did that. So 17.
Mhm.
Happy birthday, Casey.
Yep.
Going to the Army. From there, how did things develop? And maybe before we go there, did you grow up in the outdoors? Did you grow up hunting and fishing? Like, what was your exposure? Kind of your first exposure to the outdoors?
Really, it started as a young age, even out in California,
Okay.
where I moved a lot. We moved a lot, especially before my grandparents had custody of us. And I was always running around in like the creeks. Now the creeks were, sewage aqueducts, and the fish probably weren't edible.
They had 3
but I was
eyes.
catching them.
Yeah.
They had 3 eyes, and you might have to, yank something nasty off of them, and But I was killing squirrels with BB guns, and anytime I had a chance to go in the woods, I loved the outdoors. I had a subscription to Field and Stream, so I was. I don't know why, but I really was just totally into the outdoors before I even moved to Arkansas. And so you can imagine that whenever I moved to Hatfield, America, Hatfield, Arkansas. We lived 3 miles down a dirt road, way out in the sticks, on the edge of a creek, woods all around me. That I was just, oh man, I was in heaven.
You're in paradise, man.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So then from there, so you're exposed at a young age. You go to the Army. Let's go back to there.
Mhm.
From there, what was the progression of, hey, you know what? I love the outdoors. I'm in the Army. Maybe just talk me through like the next, I don't know, 5 years to the decade up
Yeah.
until getting into like, hey, I want to go deeper on conservation
Yeah.
and as it relates to
Yeah.
Arkansas, the Ozarks, wherever your mind was at then.
Yeah. So I was in the Guard, and we didn't deploy. My first deployment was 99, going over to Kuwait. And before that, I was doing odd jobs. I was doing construction. I did logging for a while and did construction, and was not interested in going to college in any way, shape, or form. Not into academics or anything like that. And had a really good mentor in the military, Sergeant First Class Troy Miranda. And he kind of took me under his wing and taught me a whole lot. He was my squad leader whenever we were in Kuwait, and I was a really good soldier as long as you kept me pointed in the right direction. I think as a young soldier, I was an outstanding soldier. I was in really good shape and knew how to follow directions. But if you didn't keep my eye on the prize, you might want to put a bell on me, because I will be doing something stupid.
Yeah.
So he was a really good mentor and taught me a whole lot. Well, then fast forward, kind of the same thing after we come back from Kuwait, 99, 2000, come back in 2000, sort of went back to civilian life, doing other odd jobs, construction and whatnot. And then 03, we started deploying, and then 04 and 05, we deployed to Iraq. And sort of long story short, one day, Sergeant Miranda, we called him Biggle. His nickname was Biggle because he worked for a drug task force out of Little Rock. At least part of the time, it was part of his job, and so he would sniff out drugs. So we called him the Biggle Dog. But Biggle, he was a lot of fun. He had a very interesting personality, and he had a master's degree and was into education. It was important to him. And one day, before we're going on a mission, he's like, "Brewster, you need to go back to college." And I was like, Biggle, this isn't going to work out. Some strive to have a 4.0. In high school, I had a 0.40. And I just, I'm not seeing it in the cards. I just thought he was giving me a hard time. But, you could tell he was serious. He's like,
Yeah.
no, and he would see different things in me. Looking back, there was certain things in our training exercises that I might pick up quicker than anyone else, especially around if it dealt with math and ballistics and some of these other computer things that we had to use, some of this technology. I'd pick it up, but then I'd end up being in trouble and he'd have to yell at me. But he'd be like, "Get back over here and pay attention." Maybe that's what it was. I don't know. But anyways, I ended up making him a promise that once we got back, to stateside, that I would, my college is paid for. I'll go give it a try. And he was killed a couple months later in action. It was a pretty ruthless attack and really tough on all of us, all that entire my company. And of course, he had already made a huge impact on my life. He made a huge impact on all of our lives. But me specifically on that, and I had made him a promise. So I came back home, and like most everyone, that's ever deployed, that struggles with PTSD, kind of filled those holes in my life incorrectly, and was drinking too much and getting in a lot of trouble and doing a lot of stupid stuff. But about 6 months later, I started. It was always in the back of my mind that I had made a promise to him. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna go to college. Well, I had never had any success in academics in any way, shape, or form, and I just knew I was going to fail out immediately. So I was doing.
Did you have an itch, like where you're like, "This is what I'm not just going to college. This is what I'm going to go study"? Or at this point, were you just like, "I don't know. I said I was going to do it."
On a promise. I just said I was going to go to college. I had zero. But that first semester, I did take intro biology. at Rich Mountain Community College, small community college there in Mena, and had a really good biology teacher, had a really good influence on me, and ended up getting a 100 on everything that I ever had. And I mean, I was overstudying. And when I say that is, I mean, like I did nothing. I worked a part-time job, but I mean, I took it so serious just because I had so little confidence in my own abilities that I'd failed everything. You know, a D was a pretty good grade for me up
Yeah.
before that. And so I ended up having all A's. And that was that satisfaction that my hard work was, you know, I could see that, and then I could do something that wasn't there, you know, even beyond just the promise that I made was, you know, it really gave me a footing and allowed me to kind of pull myself back out of that hole. And it, you know, it wasn't full circle. It wasn't everything I needed, but it was a huge step to get me out of that downward spiral.
Mm.
And so academics really did that. And you know, I went and got my bachelor's degree and then applied for grad school. And it just kept spiraling. I mean, snowballing.
Mm.
You know, I'm having really good success and I'm really enjoying biology. I went to um, Henderson State. And whenever I first went there, I was going to go into medical. I was thinking like an RN or maybe even medical doctor, something like that. I had applied for the RN program, but I was there the wrong time of year. You know, in the spring, you have to start it in the fall, or at least back then, you had to start that program in the fall. And I transferred there, had finished up my AA and transferred there in the spring. And so I couldn't start it right away. So I had to keep taking. So I went ahead and took some biology classes, and I fell in love with a field biology class, and the classes revolving around that, and realized I don't have to go medical.
Yeah.
And so that's what sort of started that pathway. And yeah, it just kept building on itself. And then probably the game changer to take me from a master's to a PhD is I put in for the Pat Tillman Foundation does a scholarship, and I got that scholarship in 2012. And so became a Tillman Scholar, Tillman Military Scholar, which is a huge, probably about as big of a, you know, as far as my resume line, about the biggest, coolest thing I have. Got that scholarship and was like, well, it's a no-brainer. I'm going to go get a PhD. I don't know why I'm really. And I had a lot of buddies that deployed with me, and they're like, Brewster, you made good on your promise, bro. You don't have to keep going, man. Like, what are you doing?
Like, I'm going to the top. I'm going all the way.
Yeah.
doing it.
I mean, like, and even looking back at different times, I almost felt like, you know, it just didn't even seem real that I really am going to go do this. I'm going to keep going. But I enjoy. A lot of people burn out through that academic process. But I think it also depends on where you're at in your life. And I had seen construction, and I had seen logging, and I had seen military life, and I'm like, burnout. This is a joke.
Yeah.
This is low pressure. Like, you know, if I study, I'll be okay. I might not make an A all the time, but if I work my butt off, it always pans out, you know, where it's not necessarily the case in everything else, in every other walk of life.
Right.
You know, you can try your butt off in business and still burn, you know,
Yeah.
and so many other things that I was around. But this was, you know, every effort you put in, you got a reward back, is how I was seeing it with academics. And so I just kept on going and sort of fell in love with conservation in my PhD, really.
Yeah.
So
I'm trying to think at what point did you, I'm trying to think why biology for you was something that you connected with, and going back to, like, you were talking about growing up as a kid, you were always fishing, you were hunting squirrels. Do you think that there was a point where you, like, connected that childhood, like, youth, your interest there with, like, military training and, like, spending time around guns and weapons, and then, you know, now I'm learning, and this is kind of a different path that I can take and combine all of these things together? Do you think that's where it all came together, or was it something different?
No, I think so. I think that was a whole lot of it. Is as you know, anybody in science is sort of question based. You're interested. You want to find out this information. You have to have that drive. That really has to be a really important part of your personality. But a whole lot of folks in biology fields get in that way because they have a love for some type of organism or groups of organisms or nature. And I really loved all animals. I mean, I you know, a lot of folks would consider me a herpetologist, somebody that really focuses on lizards or reptiles and amphibians. But I mean, I would have worked on anything. I just loved and I love the outdoors. I loved ecology as well. I just happened to kind of fall into that pathway. But that is really, I think, what drew me to stay down that path versus medical or law or whatever.
Whatever you could have
some
done.
other thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. So from here, we could go straight to the Glades, and I want to talk about that because I think a lot of people, like we've talked about, they're like, what are these Glades, and how do I find them? How do I use them? What do I need to know about them? Because a lot of people, we've talked about, the first time it came up, we were talking with Sam Hallam up in Missouri, and he was talking about how he likes to hunt Glades and how it's a very rich, biodiverse area, and he sees a lot of deer sign when he's coming through the woods. So I want to talk about that. But before we go there, I want to talk about Snake Mountain pack goats. And so coming out of school, at what point did you decide, like, I want to start Snake Mountain pack goats and tie back to like my military background and kind of have this avenue for other people to do this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I alluded to, the academics and, college and that whole pathway was a huge, important step to get me out of my downward spiral and help me with dealing with PTSD, but it wasn't everything. All right. And then, and there were times during my graduate career and even in my bachelor's career where I would notice that I'm still missing something. And, the answer was there all along. I love the outdoors. I loved hunting. I loved fishing, but I wasn't chasing it with the same, desires I did as a kid or as I do now. I went through a spell where, I still hunted, I still fished, but it wasn't the same, it wasn't everything. And that, that sort of outdoor mentality, getting into hiking, getting back into camping and all that stuff showed me that's what really helped me. So it was those two things, or a few things: being active, having something that I can chase in academics or whatever, but then the outdoors, just mountain therapy. And so I decided that a buddy of mine sent me a video of pack goats, and I'd been wanting to start a nonprofit and kind of show others some of the things at that time I was just thinking strictly of veterans, but show other veterans the things that helped me. Maybe it will help you too, And so he sent me the video of these pack goats. They were elk hunters out in the Rocky Mountains. And I'm like, why can't we do that here? I love goats. I've always loved goats. And so I started digging into it and, deep dive, called several pack goaters out in the Midwest. Several of them are veterans. I talked to Mark Warnke's a big pack goater, High United pack goats, several, and they were all extremely supportive, loved the idea. So I got a handful of pack goats and started hiking with them. And then several guys that I deployed with, we started going on trips ourselves before we even took anyone out. And we would sort of conceptualize how this would work. What would the theme be? How would we make this into this nonprofit and this sort of mountain therapy, veteran outdoors, type thing. And what's the year now? I can't remember. Is it 2018? I guess is when we officially became a nonprofit. I think it was 18.
Okay.
Was when we officially became
5
a
years ago?
nonprofit. Yes. Yeah, it's about 5 years ago. Yep. Officially became the nonprofit and felt like we were getting to a point where we could take other people out and do stuff like that. And I love it. It's been amazing.
So what do you do? Like, what is it? What is it actually, and how does it work? And what kind of goats do you have? Like, you had to go buy goats. Not everybody knows what that's like or what kind of goat to buy.
And can any goat be a pack goat?
Yeah.
Any goat can be a pack goat, but it's all based on their weight.
Okay.
So a 50-pound goat's going to carry coffee, and a 250-pound goat is going to carry all your, a lot more gear.
That's a big old goat.
Yeah, you want big goats. So that's there's not a specific breed. There's several breeds that are good. A lot of times they're mixed. There are breeding programs specific for pack goats. One of them is Washtop Pack Goats, is a sister organization that works with us, and there's also staff. So big giant dairy goats breeds typically, a few meat goats, but the main theme how we do it is we leave Friday morning, so we get folks that want to go, veterans and first responders. It's always free to them. They show up for whatever we're going to do on Friday morning. We give a safety briefing. We load up all their gear, load up the goats, and then we'll walk anywhere from 3 to 6 miles out in the middle of nowhere, set up a base camp, and then whatever activity is laid out for that weekend, we'll do that from that base camp, and then pack out on Sunday and then head back out. We always do campfire meals. Doc Janes, Brian's a huge, amazing cook. He's really stepped up our game. We did it for a couple of years without him, where I was cooking, and I think I had some awesome stuff, but he's like, he's really bougie.
He's
with
next
some of
level.
the stuff. Oh yeah, next level. So we always feed people, and they eat really well, and we do everything from big game hunts. We had a black bear hunt this last year with some amazing success, and turkey hunts and smallmouth bass fishing, squirrel hunting, you name it. We always have something. It's once a month that we do them.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
So you plan these one time a month.
Yes.
And you people can join, and y'all can invite people, or however it works.
Yeah, most of it's off social media. It's first come, first serve for 90% of our stuff. The big game hunts are getting where they pretty much from the beginning we've had to do a draw.
Okay.
So like the bear hunt, we took 5 people, and then like 200 people put their name in the hat. So we do have a point system for those that have been trying to get on a bear hunt with us forever.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah,
that's good to know.
Yeah. We mimic some of the other states that do that point system.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Why goats? I mean, I'm thinking about just you see a lot of guys, they'll pack mules, or they'll pack horses, or they'll pack even llamas or something like that.
Yep.
What is it about goats that's like beneficial, or why would you go that route versus something else?
So there are things that mules are going to be, really tough to beat, because I can't ride my goats, right? So if you're talking about something that you want to ride in there, in the distances you may be going, if you have a string of mules, you can go a long way in a couple of days, So, that would be one thing that mules might have on goats. But the thing of it is goats, I can load up a dozen goats in a 2-horse trailer, where you can put 2 mules in a 2-horse trailer. The cost of a dozen mules versus is, nowhere a dozen goats is going to be still cheaper than 1 mule.
What's a goat cost?
It depends.
I figured you're going to say
if you're going to go, let's say you're looking for a good high-end proven pack goat line, you might pay $800 for a kid.
Okay.
Or you might pay $250 if you just find somebody that's got some good-looking goats. Goats are cheap.
Okay.
And they're cheap maintenance. They're not hard to take care of. Moving them around, travel, the amount of equipment you've got to buy, the truck and trailer and everything else, it's just way, 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 way cheaper. You don't have to bring food. So with mules, if you're going to be out there, for 3 or 4 days, you're going to have to bring food. You're going to have to, consider, all of the other things that the mule needs. The goats they don't need anything. They're going to eat everything that's out there. We'll bring mineral a lot of times.
Okay.
But they'll eat the stuff that's out there. As far as other pack animals that maybe you wouldn't ride, or maybe donkeys, goats are, believe it or not, way easier to get to follow you and to pay attention and to obey and to sort of learn the whole thing. So their instinct is to follow the leader. So it doesn't take them long. As long as they're halfway tame, I can take, petting zoo goats and put them in my pack string, and they're gonna act just fine. They're
Really?
gonna follow. Yeah.
And they're not tied together or anything. They're just following you through the woods.
Correct. Yep. They just follow you
That's
all
so
the way
cool.
through the woods, wherever you go, anywhere you can go. And places that you can't even take a mule. I mean, there may be somebody that, because I've seen the movie, this Man from the Snowy River, do crazy stuff on. Maybe that shows my age, but anyways.
No, I've seen it. It's a
I
good one.
haven't seen that one.
Yeah, but there may be places that that I go that somebody on a mule would say, yeah, I can get there, but it's going to be a lot more dangerous for them. We'll just put it that way.
Gotcha.
Anywhere you can go without rappelling gear, you can take goats, like literally. And they're not going to have any problem. Fully loaded. And I do some demos on some of our day hikes where we've got this like rock wall face, and I'll climb up that thing, and it'll take me, 2-3 minutes to get up, and I'll call the goats, and they just bounce right on up it.
No way.
Yeah, they climb really well.
What's their body weight to carry weight ratio?
It's 20% of their body weight.
Okay.
Yeah, and then a really good goat that's really been, 25 would be sort of the max if you're really wanting to push them.
Mm-hmm.
We usually don't, get anything above 20% of their body weight. Um, and goats don't live as long. A mule's can pack for way longer. And the amount of weight, obviously can be 20% of a 250-pound goat. You're talking about 50 pounds, and a mule's going to take 300 pounds, I guess, somewhere in there. But you just you need more of them.
Yeah.
You know.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So you take more. So if you got a 250-pound goat, that goat can basically carry 50 pounds.
Yes.
That's 20%.
Yep.
So you haul out there, you set up base camp,
Mhm.
which sounds cool, by the way. Just thinking about
it's a blast.
a base camp
sounds sick.
with
Yeah.
how many 10, you got 10 goats out there at one point, or
Yeah.
how many do you usually take?
I usually take anywhere from 8 to a dozen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Depending on what all we need. For like our big game hunts, you're carrying in, crossbows and a lot of extra equipment, plus being able to pack whatever animals we kill out. So I'll always have, usually the max. My pack string's 12 total.
Okay. Gotcha.
So I'll bring the max. And then sometimes, when we're not doing big game stuff and it's summertime and you're lighter anyways, and if it's a smaller group, I might only take 6 or 8.
Gotcha.
So.
But you try to think about gear and then packing out too. Like if we kill a bear,
Yep.
we're gonna need pack
Yes.
weight for these goats to carry that. So I don't want to overload them.
Right.
So you're
Yep.
thinking that. It
Yep.
just sounds cool. I'm picturing this scene out in the middle of the Ozarks, 10 goats around this cool canvas tent. You
Yeah.
guys are out there
Yep.
in the back country hunting
Yep.
bear. Do you just leave them at camp when you go hunting, or?
So you have to have somebody with the goats at all times.
Okay.
Just because a predator could chase off a goat. I mean, it's lower risk in our area versus maybe the Rockies,
Sure.
but it's still a risk.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. So you don't. You leave them there at camp tethered up. We have a tether line, and somebody's with our project. There's always someone there. Now, if somebody was wanting to get into goats,
Yeah.
and they didn't have that situation, it would. I have had them staked out, just behind me in bow range. Where I could shoot a predator off of them on a short tether and have 3 goats. 3 goats can carry 150 pounds, so
Yeah.
that's plenty for one person, and set up that way where I can hunt from the goats.
Are animals spooked by them? If you're deer hunting, do you want to not keep them in sight, or is the deer going to see that and be like, it's just another 4-legged critter?
So they smell a lot like a deer, and I've noticed that most of the time when you're walking through the woods, the deer are a lot less spooky. They'll stick around a lot longer. It's like they're curious what is going on. What do I see?
Yeah.
They don't. I don't think they can tell the color patterns as much, and so just the silhouette of a goat is pretty similar. They smell similar. They kind of look similar and kind of act similar. So now, if you're hunting a big buck and those goats are up making a bunch of racket, that's probably not real helpful.
Yeah.
So, but they usually, if they're training their experienced pack goat, it don't take them long, and they just sit down and sit there and chew their cud, and make no noise. So
Yeah.
maybe burping.
Yeah, but if you're on doe patrol, you're not stressing that. It's,
No, yeah, you ain't worried about that at all.
You got to get a dog,
Mhm.
shepherd dog. What do you call those?
Yeah, just to
Just a
keep
guard
watch
dog,
over
that's the
them.
word.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you go out there with
Yeah.
your string of pack goats, your guard
Mhm.
dog.
Yep.
You go hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sounds so cool.
That sounds really cool, man. That sounds like a lot of fun. All right. Well, let's shift topics a little bit. When you're out there and you're hunting, here's gonna be my transition.
Let's hear it.
When you're out there and you're hunting, are you looking for glades?
I'm always.
How many
looking
glades
for
do you come
glades.
across?
I want to talk glades, man.
Yes.
Let's get to that. You're a glade. I don't know. Would you a glade specialist, expert? I know you specialize in restoring glade habitat. You study glades a lot. Let's just start with what is a glade and go from there.
Okay, so there's glades are a gradient. It's not like a categorical thing. There would be lots of things out there that one biologist would say that's a glade, another one would say it's kind of glady. So that's the difficult thing, and there's a lot of different types. It's based off of the geology and what's exposed, what kind of rock is exposed on the different types of glades. But in general, a glade is going to be an open habitat area, a natural habitat area that's open, that's dominated by grasses primarily and forbs, and it's going to be thin soil, typically with a decent amount of bedrock exposed, and not overrun with woody vegetation or canopy cover. And so historically, before European settlement, say, the Ozarks, since we're, around the Ozarks were just completely full of glades. There was lots of forest, there was lots of savanna, there was lots of prairie, and then all intermixed between the prairie and the savanna was glade habitat. And it wouldn't be the dominant habitat, but it was way more frequent than what we see now.
Okay.
And so the biggest loss to this amount of habitat has been, especially in the past 100 years, but really European settlement, where it's primarily due to the lack of prescribed fire. So all the species but you back up, if you think about how ecological succession works, any forest, if you go back in time, there will be a point where it was bare rock.
Sure.
And then you have mosses and lichens that kind of grow in, and those mosses and lichens will start creating some soil very slowly. But then now that soil allows some of these other hardier plants to kind of take over, and then you start getting plants that resemble more prairie plants, and then you get more soil. And then so you sort of can follow this whole thing from a soil standpoint. And you get enough soil, then you can have woody vegetation, and then enough soil, now you can have an all-out forest. You're talking about long blocks of time here,
Sure.
right? That's sort of a natural process. So when you don't have fire, what happens is you have nothing sort of stopping that natural process. And it doesn't take long, and the first thing that typically grows in from a woody vegetation standpoint is cedar, eastern red cedar. And so that's why a lot of locals call Glade a cedar glade. There's
Gotcha.
a lot of that.
Is that because they can survive in really thin soil?
They they can handle really thin soil, and they're fire intolerant.
Right.
So it's a huge. I mean, if you think about it, it's sort of a cyclic thing that all it would have taken was some fire there, and they never would have been there in the first place.
And those are invasive species, right?
They're invasive, and then they're. So what they say is, pre-European settlement, cedar was very infrequent. There was just small pockets of it, and sort of the ground disturbances and or lack of fire has allowed them to really dominate lots of different places that they never dominated before.
Gotcha.
So it's not a non-native invasive. It's just
I have heard from a botanist that they're not even sure that they are native.
Okay.
But I would be careful there because I don't know. I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be non-native in terms of 300 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
So
I
you
just
have to
way
go way
back.
back.
I remember
Yeah.
chatting with Dr. Grant Woods.
Yes.
And he was like, we chop them down and burn them. Like
Yes.
anytime we find cedars, they're
Yeah.
so terrible, all
Yes.
this stuff. Now he's looking at it from a growing deer standpoint.
Yes. Yeah.
He's like, it's no benefit.
Yeah.
Right.
Messes up
Yep.
the water, messes up,
Yep.
it's all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I didn't know if that was invasive can mean a lot of things.
Yeah. So there's non-native and then there's invasive.
Mhm.
And
then a
non-native,
non-native
invasive.
invasive.
Right. And you can have a native invasive.
Mhm.
Right. So the things that we do along the landscape allow something that is native just to take over that shouldn't be taking over. So at the very least, they're native invasives. They
Okay.
might be considered non-native, but like I said, that's sort of a different gray area of argument. that
Like
you'd
they've
have
been
to go
here so
back.
long at this point. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
At what
Yeah.
point are you calling
Right.
native? Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay,
Exactly.
I sidetracked you.
Yeah.
We're at
Yep.
Cedars, Little Soil.
Well,
Yeah, so-
on that, before you go there, Kyle, I was thinking about the property that we hunt a lot on your place, where
My
there's so
head
many
went there immediately.
cedars, and it's at the top of the hill. The soil is so poor.
It's
Mhm.
it's a knob, so it's the grassy knobs we
Yeah.
talked about.
Yep.
Could in its prime, it was probably prairie
Mhm.
on the top of a hill after old growth hardwoods with
Mhm.
glades in between.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Both.
yeah, and now it's just covered in cedars everywhere,
cedars.
and it's like there's basically no soil at all. It's just rocky substrate, and it's just terrible. Like hardly anything grows there,
Yeah.
Yep.
except cedars. So it
It's like
makes
South
sense.
Texas.
What you're saying, like I'm picturing this in the places that I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's where I'm seeing cedars pop up, is
Yes.
these places where your oaks and your hardwoods can't grow because they don't have the nutrients in the soil.
Yep, exactly. Not enough soil depth typically, and several factors around it. They're just really good at that. They're good early succession woody, plant to kind of take in. But if you think about what y'all described, is what 90% of our glades look like in the Ozarks
Now, today.
today.
Mm.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So if you went back 100 years ago, that would have been 90% of these that we know would look like a glade.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back 300 years ago, then you would have had tons more even before that.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So ideally, though, what would a glade look like?
Yeah. Yeah. What would be
Yes.
like the anatomy of a glade, or like the composition of a glade? What would you find and what would you look for?
so you would have interspersed pockets of exposed bedrock where you literally can see the ground. A lot of times it's sandstone type of a few different varieties of sandstone. Doesn't matter too much, whether you're talking about the Ozarks or the Ouachitas or the Ozark Plateau. It's still going to be sort of a sandstone bedrock base that is going to be interspersed, and it may be a huge pocket, it may be a big vein, or it may be just tiny pockets all around in an open area. And that open area is where it does start getting soil is going to be primarily dominated by grasses and prairie forbs, native plants that are supposed to be there, prairie forbs, and I mean, this is things like coneflower and milkweed and a lot of them blue stem, a lot of the species that are sort of hallmark of a good prairie type. And in fact, another name for glade is xeric limestone prairie. Xeric limestone prairie. So a lot of them are limestone.
Okay.
The bedrock and right underneath that thin soil is a limestone. Not all, but a lot of them are. A lot of them are also dolomite in our area, but that it's sort of that intermix of that. So you would still consider. You might look out there from a distance and say that looks like all prairie, but within the prairie, you would say there are glade areas also.
Gotcha. There's these pockets of exposed rock and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha. So what about outside of there, maybe like on the edges? Would you see different features along the edges of glades?
So typically you're going to see, you could probably measure this just by how much soil depth there is and what type of soil. It's usually going to be really well drained, and you're going to have drainage areas. In fact, a lot of our our best looking glades still have, like when it rains real heavy, has a little creek that sort of shows up bedrock area right through the middle of it and on edges of it. And then as you get away into the thicker soil, you're seeing more of the grasses. It shouldn't be in an all out mat. It should be pretty sparsely growing grasses, and then forbs, sort of pocketed in there. And that is always going to, in the Ozarks and even in the Ouachitas, that's always going to give way to sort of more savanna type situation where you start getting thicker soil, and you might have, some little blackjack bushes and some other smaller post oaks and a few maybe pine trees, but it's still relatively open. And then you would go farther and run into the actual forest.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in that, you typically are going to see, some larger boulders. And a lot of our glades have been stripped by the free rock that was, there, that could be used for lots of different purposes. It's pretty easy to just go and load it up. So, but a lot of them, if they haven't, have a lot of loose boulders and loose large rocks, large sandstone and sandstone piles interspersed without them.
Yeah. So we've got what it is, what to look for when you think you see one or you're looking for one. Talk to me about, like, and you gave a history of like where we were, where we're at today. We have so much less. If you had to kind of put that in perspective, like, do you even have an estimate of, like, man, we have 10% of the glade habitat that we had 100 years ago? Like, at what, how extreme is the degradation of that habitat specifically in the Ozarks?
I think if you included what was naturally there 300 years ago, say pre-European settlement, where there was significant European settlement, we would easily have less than 5% than what was here.
Less than 5%.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Now you can still find these places.
Sure.
We all know about them. Y'all just described one, right? And then listeners, anybody that spends much time in the outdoors, knows where tons of glades that are really unhealthy glades. They're a forest now.
Right.
But imagine in your mind and think back and look at the size of the trees, and and think about how long ago it was that would have been an actual functional glade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why? My question now is: we know what they are. We know where they've been, where they are today. Why are these habitats and kind of like micro habitats within our broader ecosystem, why are they important? And why should people who hunt and fish be aware of these glades?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So several different approaches to address that question. One is from the diversity, the uniqueness of these habitats from maybe an ecological perspective. We usually think of two different areas of diversity, is that's the abiotic and the biotic diversity. The abiotic being things associated with non-living parts of a habitat, right? So the substrate and the temperatures and the minerals and the nutrients and so on and so forth. Things that aren't living. And the biotic would be the living components. So if we think about glades from that standpoint, the abiotic components would be just the physical difference, right? It's pretty obvious if you see a glade, a natural glade. Anybody that spends any time in the outdoors around the Ozarks, when you see a glade, it looks nothing like physically, the rest of the Ozarks ecosystems. The geological component of it, the mineral component, the hydrology, how quickly it moves water, the physical nature of hard rock substrate is going to be very different, very diverse and very unique from the rest of the habitats. From a biological standpoint, from a biotic standpoint, the community that are adapted for and designed to live on glades are very different than what you see in the forest. So that what we would call a glade community is going to be very, very different. You're going to run into, again, your coneflowers and your milkweed. They're adapted for this, but then there's rock pink and several of these other very rare plants that anybody that spends much time outdoors, when they see that, they're like, wow, I don't ever see that. What is that?
Yeah, right.
Right. Very unique looking plants, very unique looking insects, lichen grasshoppers. If you've never seen one, when you do see one, you'll notice that it looks nothing like any other grasshopper you see.
It's a lichen grasshopper?
Lichen grasshopper.
Like the moss?
Yes.
Meaning it looks like the moss.
Lichen.
Okay.
Yep.
I got to look up a picture of these.
You're going to have lots of tarantulas, lots of other weird spiders out there. You're going to have a lot of pollinators that are really in rough shape in Arkansas and really throughout Arkansas and Missouri because they don't have enough of the plants that are associated that they're really adapted for. So overall,
the lichen grasshopper.
Yes.
I just looked up a picture.
Yeah.
Look at this thing, man.
Yeah.
That camo.
No, they're amazing.
How do you even
that
see
needs
them?
to be
You don't.
That needs to be a hunting pattern.
Some camo company should make a lichen grasshopper pattern.
They're so awesome.
That
And
is cool.
they sit there in the sun, blazing sun, you won't see them until you about step on them.
Yeah.
And they can handle really hot temperatures because they're not on vegetation 90% of the time. They're on that exposed rock.
Gotcha.
Spiders.
Tarantulas.
Yeah,
And
pollinators.
then
So there's going to be a
pollinators.
lot of different butterflies and other native bees that are really tied to those that aren't doing well because of the loss of these habitat or the plants associated with them. So from a glade community standpoint, it's a very specialized group. They're very typically endemic, not all, but most of them are going to be really tied to glades. Some of them, more often than not, they're tied to glade and prairie, but very tied to that and very unique from any other biology community that you would run into. On top of that, from just a biodiversity hotspot would be among the most high biodiversity that you could run into in natural habitats in this part of really in the country. I mean, there'd be high-end biodiversity hotspots, high biodiversity, and a lot of them, again, endemics and very different from anything else you would see.
And when you say biodiversity, how is that measured?
So that's a good question. There's several different things, but the easiest way to wrap your head around it is how many different species there are and how many there are of each one of those species.
Okay.
So
it's twofold a little bit.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The first thing, just wrap your head around how many species are there.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty good component. That's species richness, but
Right.
that gets you in the right ballpark.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which that's important if you're looking for turkeys or for quail
Yes.
or even for deer. You have a spot that's going to have natural forbs, better browse,
Yes.
better pollination.
Yes.
So even in the surrounding areas,
Yes.
healthier biodiversity, potentially better mineral content in
Yes.
water or food or whatever that's healthy for animals.
Yep.
And then it sounds like rocky outcroppings and forbs is
Mhm.
great for turkey poults,
Mm-hmm.
baby quail. Are those called poults?
Yeah.
Turkey poults? Yeah.
No, the quail.
Oh, quail.
What's a baby quail
Ooh,
called?
That's a good question.
Baby quail.
We're gonna go with baby quail.
Yeah, baby quail.
Baby
That's what I
quails.
should know that.
And that's another thing we can Google,
Yep.
that and the grasshopper. So just sorry, threw myself off there thinking about that. For the outdoorsman who's
Mhm.
interested in
Oh,
finding,
Sorry. Baby quail is a chick.
I mean,
Chick.
I think
That's way
duh,
too
it's like every
easy.
other bird.
I think we
They
knew
tricked
that.
us with
I
that.
think we knew
Yeah.
that. We just didn't
Turkeys get a cool name like a poult.
Yeah.
It's quail chick.
Sorry,
Um,
Kyle.
Mhm.
Man, I'm really sounding like I know my stuff on this one. Anyway, for the hunter who's looking to just kind of one, be better educated on where they're
Mhm.
hunting, I think that's really important. But two, beginning to understand as you're talking about this, having like a biodiverse area also pretty much automatically means you have a target rich area, right? You have a target rich environment,
Mhm.
depending on what you're going after.
Right.
Which just means your land is healthier, which
Yes.
means your hunting is better, which
Yeah.
means your enjoyment in the outdoors soars,
Right.
which means more people are going to want to conserve those areas. Like I'm just seeing how all that ties in. But
Right.
other than spiders and bugs and all of that, what do you see on like the kind of bird and mammal side of glades? Like how do they interact with the glade?
So, because of the things you were talking about, the sort of at this point rare biodiversity and things that species that don't necessarily have to live their entire life, they don't require a glade, but they can take advantage of it. There's a ton of species that really do really well, and those being any ground nesting or just about most of the ground nesting birds, um, especially quail and wild turkey. And that has to do with sort of that, as you were talking about, the amount of forage, that's going to be there, that's going to be at a really high density and high diversity, and allows them to sort of not have to eat the same species of grasshopper all day, every day, and or whatever it is that they're targeting. The physical nature of the habitat being open and sort of the sparsely distributed plant flora, the grasses not being carpeted and the forbs not being carpeted. Really good habitat there. So, if I had to, bet a large amount of money that I could take people to find turkey poults, in Arkansas, the easily the places I'm going to go are going to be glades. It's not that
That's where you're going
turkeys-
first.
Right. That's
Like,
where I'm
you're
going
gonna check out
first.
the glades.
Yep. It's not that turkeys have to have them.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of other ways that you can make those same things that a turkey or a quail needs.
Mm-hmm.
But one natural habitat that provides that in a way that very little other habitat does is a glade, a good functioning glade. But you'll always see a large number of native species that we care about, like white-tailed deer. And really, unfortunately, feral hogs love these places. And the reason being is because you're going to have plants that are not as common as what's in the forest, and so they're getting something different. Maybe their body is looking for some type of mineral or so on and so forth. Those minerals are going to be there in a different percentage and quantity and quality than what's in the forest. And then I do know that a lot of deer will actually make licks around and be literally eating soil and soil spots, because there's minerals there that are not so common anywhere else.
Yeah.
So really it benefits a ton of species beyond those.
When we were talking with Sam a couple of weeks ago, he was talking about, and I'm curious if you've observed this as you're out there on the glades, walking through the middle of it and you've got bedrock, it's probably pretty hard to spot trails and tracks of deer on rock, right? Like you're not going to see that. But when you get to the edge of a glade where you start getting into some of that thicker soil, and then you're talking about minerals and licks like that, I'm thinking about the erosion, the runoff of water on the rock, and then it pushing it off to the sides into that soil where that mineral is. Do you see a lot of the times extra tracks and trails on the edges where that soil starts to get thicker and is that because of like those minerals are running off of that rock? Is that kind of
Yeah, that's
Am I
a good
connecting that
possibility.
right?
I think whenever you have a heavier game trail coming in there, really having sort of starting the process of allowing that to start to push some of that mineral back. But yeah, you'll in the gravelly soil, the churtial soil on the edge of the glade, those make really good trails. Those make it real obvious where you can see them as probably as about as well as anything else you'd see out there.
okay?
And so it can be obvious. Yes, on the bedrock itself, no, it's not.
You're right.
You can't tell
Yeah.
anything's been there. But yeah, on those edges you can, and they're you'll see them. And I mean, the first time I really started noticing it was from feral hog sign, because the feral hogs will come in and they love. I mean, again, rare plants that are really nutritious, lots of minerals, lots of things that they're not getting, and easy for them to pull out of the ground because it's thinner soil stuff.
Yeah.
But really, I always see a ton of deer on these places, and especially different times of the year where I think they're really chasing these minerals and maybe some of these other rare plants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I've got one for you.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about the biological diversity and its benefit to an area. Other than aesthetics
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even minerals, because we've touched on that, what are the abiological benefits to a larger ecosystem?
Abiotic benefits.
Is abiological okay, or is it
Yeah,
abiotic?
no, that's right.
Okay,
Abiotic
just
or
make sure.
abiological. Yeah, no.
Say, we'll have Dan cut
Yeah,
that
same.
out if
Yeah.
I'm totally
I
wrong
want to
here,
sound
but
smart.
Totally
Well,
fine. Yeah.
I was just calling a quail chick a poult.
Yeah.
So yeah, the abiotic benefits to the large area.
Yeah, I think, a lot of it would be, wow. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think,
Stumped him.
yeah. From an abiotic standpoint, from the overall, I think the abiotic, the physical nature of an open habitat creates edges. And I think anybody that, that knows
Mhm.
much about, wild animals knows how important edges can be. Transition zones and everything else. And so they physically make that, all out transition zone. The abiotic components are going to be, wrapped around a lot of mineral stuff and a lot of nutrient turnover that is sort of not necessarily my wheelhouse, but I know that it's extremely important. And I
Right.
know that would be an important part about it. And then from a hydraulic, standpoint, they're able to move water without taking half of the ground, with it, is probably a really important component that glades are able to move water without, always moving sediment with it, where, some other areas might struggle with that and constantly be having a change in soil, oxidation of soil, and so on and so forth. So I think they would probably be better in that aspect. There's probably some other things, but that was a really good question. It's a tough one.
Well, and it's hard to divorce it from animals,
Biological,
right?
Yes. Yeah.
But I didn't know if there was something. I guess we're all tied to everything. I mean, that's what we keep
Yeah.
learning on these
At the
types of
end of the day,
episodes. But I didn't know if there was something that they can do that nothing else in the woods or in the wild can do,
Right.
for the ecosystem around it. But I mean, it sounds like moving water and minerals and creating edge habitat and all of that
Mhm.
is that answer. Like
Yeah.
it is tied to the
Yeah.
biology side.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, the other things you may go toward are sort of the gray area between biotic and abiotic, but the keeping or making good source areas for feeding rare pollinators, because we know pollinators are really important, and they may not only specialize in there, but they may really need that, and that helps those sort of source populations go out and maybe go pollinate areas that are edges somewhere else. It's not a glade, but this allows that population of this important species to really keep going. So that's definitely not completely non-biotic, but
Yeah.
it's definitely a different component because it is keeping a source population.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to ask about, so I saw a video a couple weeks ago. It was an awesome video. I think the Forest Service did it, and you were in it, and you were highlighting some of your work around the collared lizard, the eastern collared lizard, as it relates to glades and in restoration. without going, there's a great podcast that Trey Reed with the Game and Fish podcast did with you. And so if you want to hear more about some of that stuff, go listen to that one. It's a good one. But I wanted to ask you, as far as restoration goes, are there ongoing efforts right now in the Ozarks to return the Glade habitat to a time in which it once was, where we had so much more of it?
Yes, absolutely. There is a lot of effort.
Okay.
Is there as much as I wish there was? No. I mean, we're still not. We still don't have the funding, just across the state, Forest Service, Game and Fish, TNC, you name it, even private landowners, to do what they really want to do. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a specific focus. The state of Arkansas has really probably seen in the past 10, 12 years a huge increase in focus on glade restoration.
Mm-hmm.
And there's tons of glade restoration projects going on every year. And I find out about them. And in fact, I wish I had more time to go and see them, because there's always sites that are being restored, and hey, you should come look at it and whatever. So that's really good news. So yeah, there is a ton of that. And it usually, it really boils down to 90% of the time, this is removal of cedar, chainsaw work, done correctly, and prescribed fire.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like pretty much a 1, 2, 3
Yes.
rinse, repeat.
Yep. And that's 90% of it. There's other things, that goes along with it, but that's the biggest component to it.
How big can one glade be?
How big or small?
Yeah, either one.
Do both. That's a good question.
Well, I'm just thinking, I have such a poor frame of reference for what all this means, because I know I've seen them and come across them and interacted with them, but I don't know if I ever had a name for it. Like, I've just spent time in the woods, and now you're telling us, oh, I know what that is, but how big or how small?
So the biggest glades left in Arkansas are along the White River, on Forest Service along the White River, and some of those are, I think they're continuous. They're going to be shaped. Just imagine a weird, like almost like your hand, and it's kind of goofy shape, but that whole thing may be several hectares. So
what's a hectare? I've heard of it. It's like it's a measurement of acres,
100
right?
yards. Yeah, 100 yards by 100 yards. So different. This is more of a metric version of acres.
Come on, we're in America.
Yeah, that's true. So some of these bigger ones are probably 120, 130 acres.
Okay.
Wow.
Total.
And
Yeah.
a small one can be the size of like a living room.
Yes. Absolutely. I've seen little glade pockets. We all have. If you think about it, walking through the forest, and all of a sudden you'll see some exposed bedrock and thinner soil and some glade type grasses in a tiny area just like this that just happen to have just enough sunlight to still be here and room in it. Yeah.
That's
The
cool.
Devil's Den's got several examples like that, and
Okay.
and a lot of places. Hobbs State Park has got a handful of little tiny pocket glades. Micro glades, maybe you would call them. And really, if you go back 50 years, there was 20 or 30 others that were connected, or it was all one big one. But this is just what's remaining.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm going to shift topics, but before I do that, is there anything that we've left off the table on glades? Because I want to make sure to give the listeners
Yeah.
if you want to learn more about this, or if you want to know about glades, here's the things you need to know. Is there anything I haven't touched
Yeah, so
on?
there is. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned it, because I kind of forgot about it. But so I run a conservation project called the Collar Lizard Conservation Team, and on Trey's podcast, I really get into that with the Game and Fish. But it's a partnership with the Game and Fish, U of A, Forest Service now, Little Rock Zoo, and UCA, and it's all things revolving around collar lizard conservation, which includes conserving their habitat, restoring their habitat, but it's also reintroductions. So we do reintroductions. With this last year, we reintroduced 2 new sites.
Where you're actually bringing in lizards.
Yes,
to
bringing
this
in
area.
lizards. Yep.
Cool.
A small fraction of them will come from the Little Rock Zoo. We've got a breeding program there, and folks can go to the Little Rock Zoo during the summer months and actually see some of our lizards that are working to have babies for me. They have a really cool outdoor exhibit. Most of the breeders are behind the scenes, but They have these outdoor enclosures where they allow males and females to have eggs and have babies, and then they keep the babies till the next year. And so then I'll take some of those, and then I also have wild caught animals that I'll pull from a couple of different populations that are doing really well, and we'll mix the two and reintroduce new sites. And so, whenever I think of glades, I really think of collared lizards. But the reality of it is there's a lot of really good glades still left and restored glades that don't necessarily make good habitat for collared lizards. Because a collared lizard is a rock-loving species that really needs the large boulders, and a whole lot of our glades have been stripped of that. And so, sometimes we'll just bring in a whole bunch of rock and try to, native-looking rock or native rock and bring it in there. But, again, it doesn't make it not a good glade. It's just that it doesn't have sort of the full circle.
Gotcha.
Because a glade's an apex predator in terms of an endemic apex predator is the eastern collared lizard.
Really?
And they're a huge component to making a stable community a glade community. So really cool species.
Yeah.
People need to pull up a picture of them and take a look at them, or look at our website, Collared Lizard Conservation Team. There's lots more I could talk there.
I know you could go so deep on that.
Yeah.
That lizard is a super cool lizard. It's like, it doesn't even look like it belongs in the state of Arkansas or Missouri or anything like that. But it's actually, when I was a kid, I used to have a weird fascination with like catching lizards and just being outside, like with my buddies and stuff when I was young. It was like, that was our version of hunting. So we were trying to catch the blue-tailed skinks. We were trying to catch the fence lizard. We were trying to catch ground skinks, whatever it was. And there was always this collared lizard. We're like, we can't find them. We don't know where they are. And I never have caught one. So I've always had this, like, it's been on a pedestal. Like, one day I'm going to see one.
Yeah. So you come out with me sometime.
I will.
I'll take you some
I
populations.
would love to, man.
Yeah.
All right. To kind of, we're getting towards the end here, but I know, like I said at the beginning, you're involved in a lot of stuff. If you want to talk about, I know you're involved in some smallmouth research. A lot of our listeners do a lot of smallmouth fishing.
Yeah.
We do a lot of smallmouth fishing. So I would just love to hear you talk about what you're involved in and what the project is.
Yeah. So in the 40s, a couple of researchers using sort of morphology, just looking at the physical features of smallmouth bass, noticed and identified and sort of put forth this idea that we have a couple of different species of smallmouth bass originating in Arkansas. And then fast forward, there was more studies, and there was some genetic studies, and everything has point to more recently that we might actually have there. It's sort of gray area whether you call them subspecies or true species, but either way, we have these different lines of smallmouth bass that are different in Arkansas and a couple of spots in Oklahoma and Missouri, but they originate in Arkansas, that are different than what's in the rest of the U.S.
Would this be the Neosho?
Neosho would be the first one that was identified. That was the one back in the 40s. So you'd have the Neosho, and this is based off of drainages, river systems, or sort of stream systems, and then you would have the northern species, and then what it looks like is that we also have a Ouachita subspecies, and then we have a Little River subspecies, and so all these would be tied back to this Arkansas diversity in smallmouth bass that doesn't exist, anywhere else. Like I said, you can find Neosho in Missouri and Oklahoma, and Ouachita does seem to run into Oklahoma. So you would have some of these other subspecies, but they would primarily have diverged in the state of Arkansas, and so you would have this ability to from a game and fish standpoint, we would want to be able to conserve these lineages,
these unique species,
yes,
and not hybridize,
correct,
essentially to the point where the individual is no longer
there. Yeah. So that's the whole idea with this project. And so there's been a lot of research and a lot of things beforehand. But what the lab that I work with at the University of Arkansas is called the ACAML lab, which is Arkansas Conservation and Molecular Ecology Lab.
Molecular ecology.
Yeah, molecular ecology, genetics,
Okay.
and conservation genetics. We're essentially using some more high-end genetic techniques, some more recent stuff, and then a whole bunch more samples than what anyone else has ever done. So those two things combined, much better technology and much higher sampling, and we'll be able to truly piece out for sure, 100% where these populations are that are true breeding and how different they are from each other from a genetic standpoint, which isn't everything, right? Just because there's difference genetically between two species, if there's nothing else different, is how important is that?
Mm.
And I'm not saying it's not important, but it's not the same as if they live their life differently, or there's some physical differences, or they grow a different rate, or so on and so forth, right?
Well,
Some physiological differences.
on that, like what some of the
Mhm.
things you're mentioning,
Yeah.
what would be something that's enough to be like, oh, you know what, that's unique enough? Like, how do you draw that line to
Yeah.
say we need to protect that?
So that would open up a huge can of worms if we were in a room full of biologists, because biologists that really work on this stuff, they don't always agree on it. So usually, sort of a good general rule of thumb is to have two different lines of evidence that suggest that these two different groups are different species. So two lines of evidence may be genetically, there's a threshold that we use statistically to say, yes, there's enough genetic differences between them. And then if you can find a physical difference, most biologists, most taxon people that work on that systematics would say, okay, we'll agree with you. Those are two different species. Or they live their life differently, or there's some physiological difference in them, or their growth rates, their life history traits, whatever, something about them is different besides their genetics, right? So if you can have at least two separate lines of evidence, which
Yeah.
is what the project that we're working on is doing. So we're looking at the genetic evidence, and then we're looking at the shape difference. So this is sort of like an iris scan is something that I work on. It's called geometric morphometrics, where we look at the shape differences. We've got these landmarks, right? And so you've seen some of the like CIS type, deals where they look at your iris and they have all these little data points on your eyes and certain points, and they look at the overall shape. And the computer uses statistics to tell differences. So we're looking for a shape difference between these different lines of fish, and then we're also looking for morphological / what we call meristics. It's to be like ray fin counts, how many dorsal rays they have. There's two different sets of those, or anal fin rays, or so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's data that's been around forever, and sort of the first ones that ever identified some differences, like with Neosho and Northern,
Yeah.
was based off of those numbers.
I've seen that before when I was
Yes.
Googling, like, I think I caught a Neosho, but then I
Yes.
was trying to count the fins and
Yes.
how it lays
and
down.
it's tough because there's still overlap,
Yeah.
right? But part of the issue was that the individuals that were doing that didn't know about these other lines. And so they were looking at Neosho versus Northerns,
Oh,
but they weren't Northerns.
gotcha.
Some of them were Northerns. Some of them were Washitas. Some of these were little.
Some of them were both.
Right. And
Mixed.
so that makes your being able to parse them out much more difficult.
Gotcha.
So, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves on our lab, whatever, but there's some differences meristically between these lines, and there are some differences from shape analysis, and there's definitely going to be some differences genetically. So there'll be some more species
Cool.
that come
So
from this.
what are
That's
the
awesome.
Yeah.
what are the species you have identified so far, or what are the ones that we can say for sure? Like,
So we
these
know for
names?
sure that there is reason to suspect the little subspecies or species.
It's called
Little River.
It's called Little
River Basin. Mm-hmm.
Very
Yep.
cool.
So that would be just south of the Washita Basin. So the Washita runs, around like the Mena area,
Mhm.
from over in Oklahoma, the edges of Oklahoma, but runs almost straight east toward like Murfreesboro,
Yeah.
right? And then the Little runs more south from there. So their headwaters are real close to each other, but they run almost straight south out of the Washitas. And then the Neosho is actually part of the Arkansas drainage system. So it's running backwards, but runs into the Illinois, and all these rivers. Most of those around us would be your Neosho lines. And then we do have just the original Northerns, or what the rest of the U.S. has as far as Northerns in northeast Arkansas.
Right.
And most all those drainages, although There may be a different one over there. I don't want to say too much there, but there may be another one there. So yeah, we're definitely going to have at least 4 species. The most important thing is that we identify which of those. So within a drainage, you could have this river that's tied to this river, and this river has good neosho, and this one does not.
Okay.
Because we did, before anyone knew this stuff, the Game and Fish did restocking.
Yeah.
If we run low on smallmouth bass, we're going to put some more smallmouth bass.
Right.
Right. And so we did some restocking, and some of those, wouldn't have been the native. And then sometimes different things that we do to river systems causes unnatural introgression where they hybridize.
Okay.
There's lots of unfortunate things we've done there with, with moving of river and waters and dams and so on and so forth. So a lot of different things that have affected that, but we should have several good examples that we can identify and sort of try to conserve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. I remember, we talked with Dwayne Hayda a while back and his son-in-law, Tad Four, guys who they've smallmouth, they've been chasing smallmouth their whole life.
Yes.
They fish Crooked Creek a lot. And they talk about how Crooked Creek is mostly, like if you were going to go catch a smallmouth out of there, it's going to be a hybrid of some sort.
Yeah.
And at this point, because smallmouth had been stocked there, that
Yes.
northern strain,
Yes. Yeah.
it's basically you're getting a mix of what would have been the endemic native species in that drainage in that river right there.
Yeah, and I think there's enough data to suggest that most of your other your other natives besides northerns have slower growth rates.
Yeah.
And probably don't attain the same size.
Right.
So in terms of a football that everyone wants to catch, a smallmouth bass football, a neosho football won't be near as big of a football.
Yeah.
Typically.
This is the most all-encompassing Ozark episode we've ever done because we've talked smallmouth and turkeys and quail and glades and tarantulas and lizards and grasshoppers,
combat,
and goats, nonprofits, mentors,
Everything.
Yeah.
I think we've nailed it.
The fact that
I think we hit it.
Here's the thing: the fact that you can talk about that in one episode, as it relates to one, Casey, you. So kudos to you for being able to cover all this stuff.
And thank you.
And thank you. But two, the fact that you can cover all that and encompass that within the Ozarks, I think to me shows like how unique of an area and how awesome of a place that we live in is.
I agree 100%.
To be able to we've got this and here's what's going on here. Like some amazing stories going on here.
Yes.
Dude, the Ozarks are the glades of the U.S.
Yes.
I don't know what that means yet, but I'm just
I like
saying,
it. It sounds good to me.